I am here to discuss diplomacy, negotiation, and law, and of course, in the realm of again leadership. So basically, I'll do a very small presentation of the discussion around the topics, address the questions that are there, and then later on maybe I can pick a question or two. But yes, so straight to it. So firstly, leadership, law, negotiations, that for sure is intertwined. And I think it's coming from the social contract theory, which happened many years ago, yeah, that we gave up our rights, our freedoms to decide things by ourselves. Paona hatuwezani, and then we just decided let's give up some of our liberties to a group of people, and in turn they'll give us security and protection. So by that discussion in itself, that's a negotiation to sit down and think, this is the problem, we have so many issues and we can't all govern ourselves. Let's find a solution. And our solution is, let's give up our liberties and some of our rights to a small group of individuals to guide us, and in turn they'll give us protection and security. So already that's where it began. But basically, so the first element I want to discuss is what is the connection between diplomacy, negotiation, and the law. You can still hear me. Sorry, I got distracted by my Bible. It's my fellowship time. But yes. So what is the connection between diplomacy, negotiation, and the law? So firstly, diplomacy in itself is an art of dealing with people. Basically, it's just you being sensitive and tactical when you're talking to people. So you're trying to deal with them in a way that does not affect their emotion and does not annoy. So it's an art in itself. Yeah, it's an art to talk to people, negotiate with people. I'll come to what negotiation is, but in a way that, you know, you manage the relationship, the emotions on both ends or all parties that are involved. So basically, that's what diplomacy is about. So when you hear about diplomats and someone is a diplomat and all that, or even the ambassadors, basically what they use is you are sent to another country or you're sent to another organization, and all you do is you safeguard your interest and their interest in a way that doesn't affect any of your relationships. It maintains your relationship. The negotiation, it's basically trying to reach to an agreement. It's discussions that lead to an agreement. So normally, like I say, I'm a lawyer. When you're doing litigation, we're not trying to agree. We are trying to find out who's right and who's wrong. But when you're doing negotiation, because that now is a new aspect, it's no longer new, but anyway, I'll call it a new aspect that was introduced in law, what we call ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution. So we have negotiation as part of it. So you'll go into a discussion that leads to an agreement. Both parties are satisfied. The laws, that's basically the general rules that govern a country, an organization, all that, basically it. So what is the relationship between all this? Like you've seen, diplomacy is an art, it's like a language. And negotiation is the process in which you reach an agreement. So basically, it means for you to be able to reach an agreement that is favorable for both parties, you need to apply diplomacy, which is a language that doesn't affect how the two parties or three parties relate. So, what is that relation to law? So basically, and leadership. So basically, like I had Machango explain from the discussions we've had just before I came in, there's the discussion of conflict and things that arise. So basically, in leadership, it's a very tricky and a kind of balanced situation. Conflicts arise. There's a lot of complex emotions that come. Like for example, when you're dealing with Kenya, and therefore the diplomacy art is what helps you to negotiate in the different spaces that you are, if you're a leader, both politically or civic, for you to be able to reach an agreement or make a policy, or at least maintain the relationships that are there. So definitely effective leadership has to have an aspect of diplomacy in it and negotiation. And remember, we say diplomacy is what is fueling negotiation, because diplomacy is just a language, it's a tact, it's a behavior of how you do the discussion. So then that what means is diplomacy will facilitate negotiation, which will now lead to a balancing leadership, which can now help you come up with laws. And I'll give examples of how you can use diplomacy and negotiation and then now lead to a law. So I'll give you a good example with the issue that happened in Tanzania when our leader Martha Karua was there and the former chief justice. So I'll give you a different dynamic that can apply diplomacy, negotiation, and how it will have become law. So if we had handled it differently as a country from our leadership perspective, I know the president tried to apologize. Some of you were in the prayer breakfast. So let's say, so the issue is in Tanzania, they have a kind of what is also happening in Kenya, maybe a type of leadership style that is looking to be, they don't want dissent. And so we have part of their activists that are going through a kind of trial system for different reasons. And now we have our own activists and judicial or legal personnel that want to be part of it. Because remember, we are EAC countries and we have a type of relationship. So what is the problem that is here? The problem is one country, which is Tanzania, is feeling, no, your people are coming to interfere with our borders. And of course, if a leader is trying to clench into power, protect power, anything that is going to interfere with that is going to interfere with them. So in turn, there was a retaliation, yeah? And again, remember, I'm giving this example as if it was perfectly like that. There might have been other elements influencing the president of Tanzania's decision. So Martha Karua comes in, the former chief justice comes in, and they are held captive. So if our country was to handle it differently, it would have used diplomacy to negotiate with the president of Tanzania, who is Suluhu, and say, no, these are our nationals. And normally in a proper situation, a country must defend its nationals in another border, irrespective of whether they are right or wrong. And that's why in Kenya, when a foreigner does something, their country is very quick, especially US, their country is very quick to take them and say, you know what, for that crime, we'll try them in our home country. So we should have defended them, yeah? So we should have said, no, these are our nationals. They cannot be treated like this. So what is the problem? The problem is them interfering with how you're doing your processes. Okay, let's have a discussion. So they'll have a discussion, which is now negotiation. And the president has to take into account, or maybe our foreign CS has to take into account what our interest, which is to protect our citizens. Our other interest could be that our citizens can freely flow into EAC borders, including Tanzania. What is the interest of the president of Tanzania? Which is to protect her borders, to protect her power, and to ensure there's no interference. So once we've understood the interest of both parties, we now use a diplomacy, which you said is the tactic of taking care of the emotions. So now you are trying to manage the emotions of the president of Tanzania, and then now being able to discuss and say, okay, fine, let us reach an agreement. These are nationals and this is EAC. We're supposed to cooperate. So how about we find a middle ground? And then the middle ground will be, okay, fine, our people can freely come in and out, but then Suluhu will say, but they should not interfere with 1, 2, 3 things because we are an independent state. So once they've reached that agreement, how can this turn into law? So they could actually reach into either a treaty or an agreement where they will detail how can people come from Kenya to Tanzania? What are the things they can do when they move from Kenya to Tanzania? And then what protections are they going to be given? So of course, now when we go to Tanzania, we'll not be, held captive. What are the procedures on the border? They discuss that. Then they'll come into an agreement of what shouldn't a Kenyan do. So if they do this and they do this and they do this, they'll have broken this agreement and they'll have broken the laws of Tanzania. And now we are allowed to do this, which is maybe to hold them at the borders or hold them, at a police station. And then now we agree what is the minimum treatment that we can give them. So they're not allowed to be mistreated. They can be held in this type of cell. They'll be informed this. And how many hours is it required before they are released or returned back to Kenya? So that is how the situation would have gone if we are using diplomacy, negotiation, and the law. And that is how it's interrelated. The last example that I can probably use is whatever happened during the Gen Z demonstrations last year, 2024. So we had a crisis, and then what happened? Someone took advantage, and of course, come to the skills that maybe we lacked in terms of diplomacy and negotiation as Gen Zs. But there's a group that took advantage of the situation, which is led by the opposition leader at the time, Raila Odinga. So they came into a negotiation and said, this is the problem. So your government now, the main government in power, you are not fulfilling the desires of Kenyans, you're overburdening them. That's why the young people are on the streets. So let's sit down and do a negotiation, which led into the broad-based government. So there was a handshake between the president and Raila Odinga. And part of the discussions they had, which of course might not have been fulfilled by now, was one, we'll co-opt some leaders from your end, which is from the opposition, so that maybe we can have a government that is working for everybody. And then you will compensate the Gen Zs that lost their lives. That was part of the things that Raila asked for. And the other thing was supposed to be a discussion on how protests are going to be handled. So that was the negotiation that was going through. So he's saying, okay, this is the situation. For it to come down, I could have some influence for it to come down. But these are the bare minimums we want. We want Gen Zs to be compensated, and we want a discussion on how protests can be handled in Kenya. Then they reach into an agreement. So how would that have turned into law? Of course, right now there are people who are pushing for it, but it might not have reached the national media. So one example of how that diplomacy negotiation that led to the broad-based government could have turned into law is one, there's a proposed bill for victims of police brutality compensation. Then that will be, they have to discuss when protesters are hurt by police or when they're mishandled, like that happened in the issue of Albert. Then how do the families or how do the individuals, if they're still alive, get compensation from the government? The other discussion should be how protests should be best handled. Of course, there's a law that deals with protests, yeah? But maybe now, looking at the situation that happened in 2024, then what changes can be brought that can help the police handle protesters better? So that is an example of diplomacy. You negotiate, this is the situation, this is the solution, let us agree, and then this can turn into law. So that is a good example of how those three are related and how they influence society. Because if it happened that way, then it means right now we will have already had the law that is dealing with compensation for victims of police brutality. And that would mean right now, as we are discussing the Albert issue, there will have already been a discussion of how Albert's father and the family is getting a compensation. Then that now directly impacts decisions in this country. It impacts decisions in the police force because they understand, even the police will now know, okay, so if we do this and we do that and something like this happens, then because of us, the government is going to lose money, right? So that might help deal with the situation, but also that will be, because now there's a law, there's faster compensation for those victims. So that is the relation, and I've given an example of how we would have done it if it was the Mother Karua situation and how we would have done it with the Gen Z situation. So that is the interconnection. So you discuss, you use a language that is maintaining relationships on both sides, which is diplomacy. And remember, negotiation is about reaching an agreement. So we reach an agreement. We don't want young people to be killed. We don't want young people to be mishandled. And if they're mishandled, what are the precautions and what are the measures? Then once we've agreed on that, then we turn that into law. Now I'll go to the second element. So the negotiation process. So what are you meant to insist on? What are you meant to compromise on? How do people negotiate? How do leaders negotiate? Whether it's in the civic space, whether it's in the political space, or even in business and even in our careers, because even at workplace, there is negotiation. So the first thing about negotiation that is usually looked at is interests. And just when I came in, I had also that term being used by Machango. What interests are there? For you to properly negotiate, you need to understand what are the interests for each party. So what are the interests for Gen Zs? What is the interest for the government? What is the interest for another party if there's another party? If you're in a business transaction, what is your interest versus the interest of the person you're dealing with? The reason why it is important to understand the interests, you cannot discuss to reach an agreement if you don't understand what the other party wants. And I can tell you for sure, most people will not compromise on what they want, and that is their interest. So even you, when you're going into a negotiation table as a leader, you need to understand what is your interest so that you understand what is the minimum thing I am pushing for. So once you've understood the interest of both parties, now you say, okay, this is what Maryanne wants, and this is what Machango wants. How do we reach the middle table? How do we reach a position where everyone can get a win-win kind of situation. So that is a good example of. Now, these are part of the things I'm discussing. They are either principles of negotiation or strategies of negotiation. Yeah, what you use when you're going to a negotiating table, irrespective, and they cut across whether it's business, politics, activism, like that. So focus on what interests are, right? So that you're able to negotiate yours versus the other side, because every party needs to leave the table with an agreement that favors all sides. Now, once you've understood the interest, you now know what you can compromise on. Because part of negotiation is you have to compromise. There is no way you can go to a negotiating table and everything that you want has to be tick, 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 tick. That in itself is not negotiation, because remember, we've said it's a discussion that will lead to an agreement. But this is not a one-party discussion. Sometimes it's between two parties, sometimes it's three or even more. Because when you're looking, like, for example, the Gen Z situation, you have the interests of the country, what Gen Zs particularly think those interests are. You have the government, you have the different sectors of the government. So it had so many parties that are going to be involved. So you can't go to the negotiating power with only your interests. You also need to know, these are my interests, this is the minimum I want, and what can I be able to negotiate, to compromise on. So sometimes what is compromised on is time. And time is mostly compromised in situations like businesses or where money is involved. So, for example, if you're dealing with money, whether it's purchase of property, whatever it is, and there's cash flow, and if it involves a lot of money, sometimes someone might try to negotiate on money. So, for example, in my career, when you do these purchases for property, right now the government has the affordable housing. So let's say you are purchasing a property, maybe not under the affordable housing, these apartments. They normally have the price for it, what is the deposit, and the timelines. So sometimes you try to negotiate price. So maybe you're being asked for 12 point something million and you don't have that money. So you're trying to reduce the 12.4 to 12 million or 11.9. And the other party is stagnant. It says, no, this is the amount of money involved. So what can you do? You could agree to stick to the amount, both parties. But then you say, because of the amount of money that is involved, and I might not have this amount of money right now, how about we negotiate on the timeline? So maybe you required me to pay within 24 months. Can we now do 36 months? So that we spread the payment over 36 months. So you'll find that in this negotiation discussion, all of you, what you want, your interest is the property, their interest is the money to the property. So you want to buy, they want to sell. And you've now agreed, fine. It seems like the price is fixed and there's no party agreeing. But now let's move the dynamics and change maybe the form of payment or the period of payment. And then you find this person, okay, I'm willing to pay you the complete amount, but I need more time. So how about I spread the installments instead of 24 to 36 months? And then you find, okay, because this person's interest, which is to sell, and to get the money, they are still protected. And your interest, which is to buy and gain property, is still protected. What is changing is the time. So they are more likely to agree, fine, let's do the 36 months. So you walk out with a win-win situation that although you were negotiating for maybe 400K slash and it was not possible, you now have more time to look for the 400K that you were at the time you were not willing to. So you need to understand what your interests are so that you are able to know what to compromise on. Remember, and these are part of the weaknesses that I might highlight about us as maybe Gen Zs or sometimes activism. So like right now, there's a question of the Gen Zs will, or the people on the streets on the Albert issue, they want the DIG to resign. But there's already a fear that if you give Gen Zs what they want, which is the DIG to resign, what is the next thing that they'll ask for? They'll want the IG to resign. Then when the IG resigns, what thing will they ask for? They'll ask the president to resign. So the challenge that has been there with conversations with this type of activism is the other party on the other side, who's probably the president or the government in whole. They've already studied you and they know. When we give you one thing, you want another thing. And when you give you the other thing, you want another thing. So how are they feeling? They cannot compromise because you'll not stop asking. But let's say if the Gen Zs if they just focus on pushing for the DIG to resign, as a form of punishment, and also for it to serve as a lesson, whatever it is. We are standing on the interest that here there is murder that has been committed in the hands of the police, and it's not acceptable in our law and in our society. Let's agree on that. And of course, even the government will be okay. We agree on that because already, whether it's true or not, the president has issued a statement and he's saying he's also not agreeing with the situation, irrespective of whether you believe it or not. So at least there's some level of understanding that we don't agree on what happened. So what is the solution? But even in this solution, remember you're negotiating. You cannot push too much. You cannot go negotiate with the president and say, I want this, and finally I want you out. In that middle of that negotiation, it will not happen. Both parties will walk out with nothing. But let's say we are pushing, at least, firstly, there's an involvement, if there's proof, and if there's this, we want the DIG out first. Then we can go to, then they'll know, okay, fine. The president might think, if I let this DIG go, then this situation will come down. And they are more likely to let one party go. But if you say the DIG, the IG, and you, the negotiations become tricky. During the last year, we pushed for the CSAs to be recalled or to be removed from office. And the president looked like they're listening. So in that type of negotiation, if you're pushing for the CSAs to be recalled or removed from office or fired, then they were fired, right? But then he had to appoint CSAs. And sometimes the pool is just the same according to their own way of doing things. So what is the compromise for Gen Zs? You already got the CSAs to be fired. So maybe the compromise will be fine. He's appointed, and some of the people who've been appointed are the very, very same CSAs. So maybe that's where your point of compromise is. Some were fired, some were reshuffled. Maybe it could bring better governance, or maybe not. But you see, in the negotiation table, you have to be willing to compromise something. So that would have been the compromise of, let's see if this, what actually looked like a reshuffle as more to an appointment, will actually work. So what have you gotten? The CSAs were first sent home. At least you got that out of the table. What are you willing to compromise? There has been a new appointment and some have been repeated, but let's give them time to see if anything will change. That is negotiation. So how do you negotiate? Part of the things that you need to take into account is, one, you must be coming from a point of collaboration. In negotiation, there is no me versus you. That is in court or litigation. Negotiation is, what are our interests and how do we bring our interests together for every party to be happy? So you must look like you want to collaborate. The other thing you need to do is you need to communicate. Proper communication. Part of the weaknesses that we had was when there was a table for negotiation, what did Gen Zs do? We said we don't have a leader and therefore we don't have representatives to go send to talk to us. You come talk to us as a whole crowd. So look at it as we're discussing it logically. You're discussing negotiation and diplomacy and leadership. Will the other party really come and negotiate with the whole crowd? And especially in political leadership, that's not possible, right? So that means our voice was actually missed out on in that table of negotiation. And you see, other parties took advantage of it. And that is why you even had the leader of the opposition come and say, no, let's sit down and talk. But he was not a Gen Z and he was not on the street. But more likely, if we compromised on the issue of we don't have a leader and at least chose spokespeople to go to that negotiation table, maybe some of the things we are agitating for will have been captured in the agreement, etc., etc. Or even now that they said you should compensate Gen Zs, maybe there will have been someone appointed among the people we've sent who will be behind the conversations, behind a bill, and the one who will have like a task force, yeah, to say these are the people who are injured, this far, the president, this has been compensated, this has not been compensated. But we sent no one. So you have to communicate and you have to be in the table of the discussion. Remember, negotiation is a discussion to reach an agreement. So you are not in the table of discussion. So you cannot negotiate when you're not there. So you have to be in a position where you're communicating and communicating directly. The other thing is that you have to be willing to compromise. And I think I've taken time to discuss compromising. Understand what is the minimum you want. Is the minimum compensation? Is the minimum reduction of police brutality? Or is the minimum, when there's police brutality, those people pay? Yes, I'm not leaving this table unless I'm getting that. But what other things can you be able to compromise on? Maybe the time frame. Maybe the amount of money that we'll say victims will be paid. Maybe the punishments that will be given, etc., etc. Those might be things you're willing to compromise, but you've stuck to your goal, or what we call now your interest. What are the rules that are there? One thing is, when you're going to a negotiation table, and this not just in politics, even in business, don't look like you're selling. People don't like to feel like they're being sold to. Instead of looking like you're selling a product, give a solution. Remember, even part of the advices we were being given about careers and all that, you're usually told, if you want to make money, forget so much about money and think about which problem is there and what solution can you give. And when you start to give solution to societal problems, money starts to follow you. Think about it from that point. When you go to a negotiation table, everybody has interest. We've discussed that. Something they really want and they don't want to compromise. Find common ground. And that is most of the time a solution. So whether it's in business, whether it's in activism, whatever space you're in negotiation, ask yourself, what's the problem? What are the interests? What is the solution? Be more focused on giving the solution than selling a product. When a client comes to me as a lawyer, I don't sell them my legal services, discussing it from a point of, I can do this and do this, but now you'll have to pay me this, you'll have to do this, and these are the costs that are involved. No. First of all, I am there to listen to the client. And I'll come to that, which is active listening. It will come to my last discussion. So I'll listen to the client to understand where they're coming from, to understand their problem, and to understand their interest, which is what do they want to safeguard. Kama ni mambo ya shamba, if it's a marriage, if it's succession, whatever it is, even if it's a divorce, what is their interest? What is that thing they want to get out of this case? Once I have understood that interest, and this is the problem hindering their interest, I give them a solution. When I give them a solution to an extent that they can almost see it, and they agree, this is what I need, and this is what will solve my problem. Now, after that, when I bring the issue of fees, they are easy to incline because the solution that they want is there. So now we have now brought the solution, they've understood it, that is what they want, they feel listened to, and they feel this problem is going to be solved. Now you can introduce the element of money. So the approach is to give a solution first. And now you see when you introduce the element of money, this person is more likely to agree. So I say, no, for this matter, I do 150K. So they're likely to agree, you're the lawyer that I want because you've given me the solution that I need. But now they might also get into a negotiation with me about fees. So they'll say, okay, fine, I don't have 150,000 upfront. So remember, the interest of this individual is for their case to be solved and a particular solution to be given. Maybe they don't want to lose the land. I have offered to give a solution to their land to make sure that they don't lose the interest to the land. And then I've introduced money for it. So what I want is to be paid, and I want to lock this client. What the client wants is a solution. We've all understood that. So now the client is negotiating on money. And of course, now I want to be paid. Then I could say, fine, these are the legal fee and this is the minimum. The law does not allow me to charge less. But what I can do, instead of you giving me 150,000 upfront, let's discuss an installment payment that is comfortable to you. Because of course, legal cases are not solved in a day. Some of them even take months. So I am able to say, fine, can you pay me the 150,000 with 3 installments? A deposit of 50,000. I want a 50,000 after maybe after the first hearing, and then 50,000 towards the conclusion of the case. So now both of us are happy. The client has seen a solution. They've been charged a lot of money, but now they're happy because they're able to pay that money within a period of time, as opposed to immediately. And I have gotten a client and job to do and service to deliver. Again, it's a win-win situation. What I've compromised on is the ability to be paid that money at once. But every party has gotten what they want. So first give a solution. Then go to the negotiation table with strength. Speak from a point of confidence and strength. And the only way you can speak from a point of confidence and strength is if you've done preparation. You cannot go to the negotiation table without preparing. In fact, there's a rule, I didn't bother, but anyway, I'll just say it. There's a rule in negotiation that they call the 80-20 rule. which basically says 80% is preparation and then 20% is the negotiation. So preparation is like that, understanding what are the interests, seeking information. You have to be properly informed. If you're dealing with the government, what is their position? Where are they coming from? Why do they want what they want? What do I want? Where am I coming from? What is my position? You have to be properly informed, and that means you have to properly prepare. Without preparation, you don't have the confidence because you'll raise something, they'll raise something else. And because you've not researched it, you've not thought about that angle, you start wavering in your conversation. And that weakens your negotiation. You cannot go to a negotiation table weak. So go from a point of strength and confidence. The other thing is, again, compromise, know when to walk away, right? So even in this activism that we like to do, Gen Zs, etc., we also need to know at what point do we walk away from the streets, or at what point do we say, okay, fine, the government has compromised on 1, 2, 3 things, we can let it rest. Negotiations have to have an end. So just know what is your bare minimum. This is what I want. If you're getting that, are you willing to compromise everything else? Time, money, whatever is involved, because it's different circumstances for different things. And then now know when you're willing to walk away. Because in a negotiation table, if you don't know when to walk away, you might not get it. You also don't want to look desperate. If you look desperate, the other side will silently prey on you. Of course, negotiations are supposed to be in good faith. But remember, we are dealing with tactic. Say diplomacy, yeah? It's a tactic. So the other side, if they feel you're weak, they will again use your weaknesses against you. So please go prepared. So this preparation, find information. When you have the information, now you're able to bargain. Negotiation is just bargaining. It's like what we do in the market. Simi niko na 650 etc until you reach a price that each party is agreeing on. So you cannot bargain without information. It's the same way if you go to a job interview. HRs in the, I know AYLF, we have HRs, we even have talent recruitment. They would tell you this. For even about salaries, yeah, you can only negotiate if you understand, first of all, what services are you bringing to the table? What are your strengths? What does the company want? And then what is the market value for your position and for your number of years of experience? If you don't know HR level, maybe 5 years in practice as a HR, how much they're more likely to earn, the range. How are you able to then to negotiate your salary? Because even if you give a range, you have to have something that is backing your range. So again, be prepared in order to be able to bargain. Then you have to justify your position, which is what I'm talking about. Like, for example, that if it's about salary, when you're quoting a range, what is the justification of your position? That could be, these are my strengths, this is my level of experience, this is what I bring to the table, and this is the market value, or this is what companies of your level and stature doing the same thing, this is how they pay. You have to have a justification for your position. If it's politics, if we are saying no, our CSAs are not working, they need to be fired, they should be technocrats, we need to justify a position, including that's in the constitution. But if you don't know that's in the constitution, then how are you going to argue? So is it abusing our law? Is it? So even if you're going to a political discussion, even with the finance bill, if you're saying no, we don't want our social media to be snooped in. Yeah, we don't want a budget to be allocated to this. You have to have a justification because this budget will lead to this. These systems will do this. This is the justification of your argument. It will interfere with data protection. It will interfere with the right to privacy. It might also be misused. And now we have an example of like whatever happened to Albert. What if you snoop in those conversations? Now you're snooping on where they are, and eventually they're ending up dead. It might lead to increased enforced disappearances. You need to have a justification for your argument. You just can't tell the government, no this, no budget, or budget 2025, no. Just because we rejected the 2024 one does not mean that every time there's a financial budget, the answer is no. So you cannot now say, no, we rejected last year, we're rejecting this year. I had the Machango asked, have you read the finance bill? So for you to be able to say, no, I reject the finance bill 2025, it can't be because of last year. And it can't be because there are other young people that are rejecting it. And it can't also be because there has been a police brutality. You have to have a proper justification. What are the segments in this finance bill that you're saying are harmful? or will interfere with the rights of the common mwananchi. That is your justification. Then you have to consider the other side. Remember, diplomacy, we said, you're maintaining relations, maintaining feelings. You are giving a different opinion. You are dissenting without offending the other side. So you need to understand, if it's in business, this other partner, where are they coming from? If it's in politics, this government, where is it coming from? Where are they allocating whatever they are allocating? Where are they doing whatever they are doing? If it is if it is in the community and there's some discussion that you're having, where are these community members coming from? If it is in AYLF, where are the members of AYLF coming from? Where are the leaders, the ones who are working in the AYLF offices, coming from? If you don't understand the other side, you cannot be able to effectively negotiate, because their interests have to be taken into account. Your interests have to be taken into account. That is what negotiation is. Then keep your emotions in check. Negotiation doesn't want feelings. Reasons being, fine, feelings sometimes help to move the other side to understand, because they also need to be empathetic, and you also have to be empathetic. But also the issue about feelings in negotiation is your feelings can as well be used against you. One, they can blind you. So if you're negotiating from a point of anger, you might be unreasonable in your negotiation, in what you're demanding. Yeah, you might be demanding something that is impossible. So, like, I keep giving examples, and of course, it's an emotive issue. But logically, right now, to say we want 3 people, IG, DIG, president, to resign because of this, might actually be impossible. The circumstances might not give you what you want. So you can negotiate, like I keep saying, maybe for one party that is directly involved to resign, or to first resign, then take them through the legal process. So, but if you're totally angry, you might not want to listen to the other end. You might not even know, my negotiation is I'm pushing for too much. I might not be able to get that too much. You're too angry to even realize I'm asking for things that cannot happen. And that means you'll walk away from the table empty. So avoid emotions, so that the emotions are not used against you. And I keep referring to situations, because this is a leadership forum, and I keep referring to the active situations that are there. So, for example, the Gen Z protest for last year. Part of the reasons we didn't want to choose a leader is because if this leader changes the tune, a group of us might actually follow the leader. So those are part of the things. If you negotiate and you have emotions, if the person you're looking for or looking up to actually uses those emotions against you, maybe to persuade you or to lie to you or to call you cousins, and that you actually think you're cousins, then they might just overempower you in that negotiation, and you might end up walking away without what you actually wanted when you got into the table. So lack of emotions helps you to think clearly, critically, and logically. That is emotional intelligence. Then again, know, what are you willing to accept? What is my minimum? So that you know when to walk away and you know what to compromise on. Yes, cousins. Now coming lastly to my last conversation before I allow questions, if any, or clarifications. So, what is the art of diplomacy in leadership? Yeah. How do you balance being firm and that tact? Because again, diplomacy is tact. Yeah. And tact is basically knowing when to say things, how to say them, and how to act in a way that does not cause the other person to feel offended. Yeah. So no emotions with diplomacy. It's just basically emotional intelligence. Yeah, knowing how to balance. So firstly, the one thing I'll say is, let's keep firmness here. Let firmness be constant. Because if you're trying to look at how you can balance, whether it's at workplace or even as a leader, political leader, or leader in the society or in the civic space, your firmness is constant. It's here. So what you need to employ that is changing is tact, which is what we're calling diplomacy. So your firmness stays constant. We now discuss how you use this diplomacy to keep both your firmness and your effectiveness in check. So before I start, there's this quote by Roosevelt, and he says, "Speak softly, but carry a big stick. You will go far." Speak softly, but carry a big stick. You'll go far. So what am I talking about? So the big stick will be the firmness, The softly is part of the tactics, which is diplomacy. So one thing is, your firmness will be like a structure. If you're a boss, if you're a leader in AYLF, if you're a leader in your small circles, if you're a leader in the political space, whatever the place you are in, we've said your firmness stays constant. That means it's your structure. But what will make your structure bearable? That's the place where diplomacy comes in. So your structure is there, which is your firmness. That doesn't change. But what will make it acceptable to people? How is Machango's leadership acceptable to people? How is the AYLF way of doing things acceptable to people? That one will come from diplomacy. And what is this diplomacy that we're saying? Which is this start? One, your intentional communication. If as a leader you do not communicate your position, where you're coming from in this position, or what is the basis or justification for that position, more likely people are not able to understand where you're coming from. The CS Treasury Mbadi said in his speech, for those who listened, that he took his time to explain, unlike last year, why this budget is moving to this budget, why this one is moving from here, why this one has been cut. And he said part of the reasons were Kenyans said you don't explain you just say this and this, you read the budget, they don't get the explanation of what is going to do what and what is it going to achieve. So he said part of the reasons he took time to explain was because of that. So he was probably trying to make the communication clear. So intentional communication, let people understand. And part of the intentional communication is language. We've said again, diplomacy is an art, where you're trying not to annoy anyone. You're trying to negotiate without annoying people. So language matters. It's not about what you're saying, but how you're saying it. There is someone who can correct someone. And the way they've corrected them the way the Bible says, correct one another with love. But there's another way a person can tell you the same thing, and that thing agitates you, breaks the relationship down to an extent that it's irreparable. So you have to choose your language. And that is why diplomacy is literally studied. Because it might look easy when I say it's a language and a tact where you're not annoying people. But it's not easy. That is why it's actually taught, and people have to learn diplomacy, and it's even a course in itself because it's an art. It's like a science. You have to understand it, and you have to pick words carefully. You have to pick your language carefully. The other thing is empathy and active listening. So part of the things that might affect leadership. You remember last year, again, during the Gen Z protests, there was an incident of very many people being killed. And there was this incident where a child was shot many times. And during the interview, the president said, after being told, they said that they're alive. And that statement annoyed everyone. But of course, there's no way they're alive, yeah? But again, how he said it, the body language. Now, it made it worse. Why? There was lack of empathy. When we broke into parliament and then there came the speech, there wasn't a sign of remorse. We've pushed you there. We should have listened to you. We had now moved. I don't know. We had moved from being something like thugs. At some point now we were like his children. But even then, the speech had no empathy. It had no act of I've listened and maybe we are sorry and we understand where you're coming from. Those things were lacking. So in that situation, everything the president said or another leader said that lacked empathy, it had an effect of adding salt to the injury. So Kenyans will be more angry. I think recently you've also had the remarks by Junet about Albert, and he said, why are people complaining? Also, you maybe go kill someone so that you're able to mourn properly. Very insensitive marks. Then now you'll find that instead of that conversation in parliament making Kenyans to go back home, they'll now go back to the streets more because there's someone who's not empathetic in their statements. So you have to choose your words in leadership. And that means you have to employ empathy. You have to act like you understand where they're coming from and what they're saying, and that you're actually listening to them. Because you can imagine, and I think some of our past leaders had these elements. I tend to find like Uhuru was not a good 100% good leader, but they had elements of, he looked like he's listening to you and he would make jokes about some things, etc, etc. So there's that level of empathy, and I level where you're coming from, and that is very important in leadership. And the element of listening. I had someone say, the presenter, the videos we were watching from YouTube, they talked about, you have one mouth and 2 ears. Yeah, you have to practice the element of active listening. There is also the issue of problem solving. You have to be solution oriented. You cannot be you versus the people who are bringing you the problem. You have to think, this is the problem, what is the solution? And remember, even when we were discussing negotiation, that's what we talked about. What are the interests? What is the solution required? So if you're a leader that intentionally communicates, and when an issue is brought to you, you listen with empathy and you actively listen, then the next thing is you provide solutions. You are active in problem solving. That creates confidence and trust in the people you're leading. That one, if you go to Matrango, if you go to Gabriel, he'll actually listen to you. If you come to Maryanne, she'll actually listen to you and properly listen and try and understand where you're coming from. And then they will try either collaboratively with you or in their position as a leader to find a solution to the problem you have raised, which sometimes is what is missing even in the national leadership, where you'll complain, they'll not act like they're listening, they'll not act with empathy, and then they'll not look like they're trying to solve your problem. And then now it agitates the situation. And then now your leadership is in question, and now people want you out by force. The other thing is emotional intelligence and discipline. As a leader, you cannot show your emotions. And I think my boss has mastered this. She's a lady, she's mastered this very well. When you're talking to my boss, at any one point, you'll not know if my boss is happy or angry or frustrated. She has the same reaction to everything in terms of her face. Her face is just the same, right? So we are not able to know what is what and when is when, but she has some level of emotional discipline that even her, if whatever is being raised is difficult for her to handle or she's not so sure how to approach it, you will not know, which again brings confidence to your people. Because if your people don't find you looking sometimes defeated, like you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how you're running the company, the business might be having a crisis, but your employees cannot be feeling the crisis from your face as the boss. They'll start to panic and resign and overthink. Because if the boss is looking like that, then our company is surely falling apart. I should start, sending my application somewhere else. So as a leader, you have to employ emotional intelligence and also discipline. You have to be firm, but in a way that you look, yes, you're listening. Yes, I'll find a solution. They can have confidence in you, but there's no emotional waviness, too angry, too lenient. You have to have a balance in between. And then now you also have to be a strategic thinker, which means you think on your feet. One, you need to find how to balance the interests of everybody. And that means thinking of a solution quickly, but that solution again has to make everyone feel involved. Because again, the issue about negotiation is reaching an agreement where everyone is satisfied. And again, you have to build trust. So these are very important. Yeah, this is how you can incorporate diplomacy, because again we've said diplomacy is attacked, no one is annoyed, you're maintaining the relationship even when there is a problem, and you're trying to find a solution without intensively affecting anyone or annoying them. And the best you can do that in leadership is of like the things we're saying. You're intentionally communicating, you're actively listening, you're employing empathy, you're being strategic in your thinking, and you're employing emotional intelligence and discipline even as a leader, and you're maintaining the trust. So yes. So what is this art in diplomacy, and how can the art of diplomacy in leadership, and how can we summarize it? One, be clear but not cruel. There are leaders who are not able to differentiate that. Yeah, you can be clear in your firmness, clear in your structure. This is how I expect things to be done, but you're not cruel. Whether it's to employees, if this is a business setup, whether it's to the citizens, if this is a political setup, whether it's the community, if you're helping the community with something. Again, you are decisive, but not domineering. That means you're not forceful. The best way for you to lead is to be influential. you influence others to do the things you say. You influence them to practice the values you keep talking about. So you are decisive, you are clear in your communication, but you are not cruel and you're not forceful. And the last thing is you are empathetic and not evasive. Yeah? National conversations. Citizens cannot raise something and then you answer with something else. That is being evasive. And for as long as the people you're leading are not feeling like you have empathy to their issues and to their problems, they'll not trust you, they'll lose confidence in you, and they'll want you out, or they'll want you replaced, or they, at most, like in our workplaces where you can't replace them or push your bosses out, you'll now start looking for another employment because you feel here you're not being listened to. So again, be clear, not cruel. Be decisive, not domineering. And again, be empathetic and not evasive. I think that brings me to the conclusion of this conversation. I'm happy to welcome questions and any other direction. Back to you.